The war horn cracked across the river valley like a bone snapping, and Yash Ashwalker did not run. Everyone else did. Around her, the warband scattered back toward the tree line in a ragged wave of hide cloaks and iron-shod boots, her clanmates shouting to one another in the guttural cadence of retreat, arrows from the bloodfin ambush still hissing down out of the millside scrub. Smoke rolled off the burning grain barge moored at the ferry crossing. The graywater ran red at the shallows, where a bloodfin raider had gone down under her own axe not a minute before. And in the mud at her feet, clutching a torn belly wound with both hands, lay a human man she had met only 3 days prior, Clayton Walker, the valley's field surgeon, who had come down to the crossing at dawn to treat a miller's broken arm and had somehow ended up in the middle of a war. Yash! Her uncle's voice cut through the chaos, hoarse and furious. Rurik Ashwalker stood at the tree line with his axe raised, blood sheeting down one tusk, waving his arm in the sharp, chopping motion that meant fall back now, no arguments. Leave him. He is not ours to bleed for. She did not move. Clayton's eyes were open, glassy with shock, fixed on her the way a drowning man fixes on the one shape still standing in the flood. His apothecary satchel had spilled across the mud, little glass vials rolling into the churned earth, bandaged linen unspooling like a torn flag. Blood soaked through the front of his plain wool shirt, dark and spreading, and his lips were moving, though no sound came out. Yash Ashwalker, Rurik roared again. That is an order. We cannot hold this ground, the bloodfin have the ridge. Another arrow struck the mud a foot from her boot, quivering upright like a grim little marker. She looked at it, looked at the tree line where her warband was already melting into the shadows of the pines, looked at the smoke-choked sky over the ferry crossing that had, until an hour ago, been nothing more than a quiet border town's lifeline of trade. And then she looked down at the man bleeding out in front of her, a man who had spent the better part of the last 3 days stitching orc wounds with the same steady hands he used on human ones. Without ever once flinching from her tusks or her size or the old, bitter history that sat between their two peoples like a stone in a well. No, she said. It was not loud. It did not need to be. It carried anyway over the crackle of the burning barge and the shouts of retreating warriors, and it landed on her uncle like a slap. I'm not leaving him. She dropped to one knee beside Clayton, seized the torn edge of his shirt and pressed it hard against the wound, feeling the hot slick of his blood soak instantly through her fingers. He gasped, a thin, ragged sound, and his hand came up weak, trembling but deliberate to close around her wrist. Go, he rasped. Yash, go, you cannot, the whole ridge is. Be quiet, she told him, not unkindly, and looked up in time to see a bloodfin scout break from the scrub not 30 paces off. Spear leveled, teeth bared in a snarl of triumph at finding easy prey. A lone orc woman crouched over a downed human, both of them cut off from the retreating warband. Yash rose to meet him with her axe already swinging. The bloodfin scout was fast, but he had made the mistake every enemy of the Ashwalker line made sooner or later. He had looked at her and seen only a woman kneeling in the mud, tending a wounded man, and had mistaken tenderness for weakness. She caught his spear haft on the flat of her axe, wrenched it sideways with a twist of her whole body, and drove her elbow into his throat hard enough to fold him in half. He went down gagging, and she did not wait to see if he rose again. She turned, hauled Clayton up by the arm with a strength that made him cry out, and half-carried, half-dragged him toward the ferryman's shack at the edge of the crossing, using the low stone wall of the mill race for cover as more arrows sang overhead. Yash Ashwalker. Rurik's voice from the tree line was fading now, swallowed by distance, edged with something that might almost have been grief. The war band moves without you. Then it moves without me, she shouted back, not slowing, not looking back, her arm locked around Clayton's ribs as he stumbled and gasped beside her, his blood painting a dark trail across her forearm and the front of her leathers. I am not leaving a wounded man to die on ground I can still hold. She did not know in that moment whether it was true, whether she could hold anything, one woman against a war band's worth of bloodfin raiders. She only knew that something in her had set like iron the instant she had looked down and seen Clayton Walker's eyes find hers instead of the sky, as if she were the only steady thing left in a world coming apart, and she had not been able to make herself walk away from that. She got him behind the ferryman's shack, propped him against the stone foundation, and used 2 more strips of his own scattered bandage linen to bind the wound as tightly as she dared. Her hands, thick-knuckled and scarred, worked with a rough competence that surprised even her. She had bound enough wounds on her own kin to know how, but she had never done it with her heart hammering quite like this, never done it while straining every sense outward for the sound of pursuit, never done it while a human man's blood-slicked fingers gripped her wrist like she was the only thing keeping him tethered to the world. "Why," Clayton managed through gritted teeth as she cinched the linen tight, "would you do this? Your own people, they will call you deserter." "They will call me many things," Yash said grimly, checking the angle of the arrow that had grazed his side before the spear thrust had finished the work, a fresh detail her healer's eye, sharpened by years at war, catalogued without meaning to. "Deserter is not the worst of them. You do not even know me. I know you sat up 2 nights running to save the life of a bloodfin captive my own clan would have let die on principle," she said, tearing another strip with her teeth. "I know you did not ask him what clan he bled for before you closed the wound. I know few men, orc or human, would do that." She met his eyes close now, her face inches from his in the smoke-hazed light. "That is enough to know." The sound of hoofbeats and shouting was retreating now, west along the ridge road, the Bloodfin raiders apparently satisfied with having driven off the smaller Ashwalker warband and content to let the fleeing remnant go rather than press the advantage into the town proper. Yash allowed herself, for the first time since the ambush began, one long breath. "Can you stand?" she asked. "I can try." "Do not try, do." She hauled him up by the arm again, slung it over her shoulder and started walking, half carrying his weight with an ease that made him laugh, a startled, pained, disbelieving huff of breath despite everything. "What is funny?" she demanded, not stopping. "Nothing," he said. "Everything. I have stitched 100 men on this river and not one of them ever got carried off a battlefield by an orc woman half again as strong as any soldier I have treated." He winced as his boot caught a rut in the road. "I am trying to decide if I am dreaming this from blood loss." "You are not dreaming," Yash said. "Though if you were, I would still be the best part of it." That startled another laugh out of him, weaker this time, edged with pain, but it was, she noted with some private and unexpected satisfaction, a real one. They came into Millbrook Ford like that, an orc warrior half carrying a bleeding human man through the mud-churned Main Street, past the miller's wagon and the shuttered trading post, and the row of stone cottages with their doors flung open and frightened faces peering out, a sight the town had never seen and did not know what to make of. A woman clutched her child back from the road. An old man reached for the hay fork leaning against his fence, though he did not lift it. Somewhere a dog barked itself hoarse. Yash felt every eye on her, felt the old, familiar weight of human fear and human hatred pressing in from every doorway, and she did not slow her pace by a single step. "This way," Clayton managed, pointing with his free hand toward a low, timbered building near the mill race with a bundle of dried herbs hanging over the door. "That is mine, the apothecary." She got him through the door, laid him on the narrow cot at the back of the single crowded room, shelves of jarred herbs and tinctures rising to the rafters, the smell of dried lavender and vinegar and old parchment thick in the air. And it was only once he was down, once the immediate danger had passed, that her hands began, very faintly, to shake. "You should not have stayed," Clayton said quietly, watching her from the cot, his voice thin with exhaustion and blood loss but his eyes still sharp, still fixed on her with an attention that made something in her chest tighten strangely. "Your warband, your clan, I have seen what happens to orcs who cross their own kind for human sake." "I know what happens," Yash said, and did not elaborate because she did know, and the knowing sat cold and hard in her belly. "I made my choice." "Why?" She looked at him a long moment, at the pale, sweat-damp face, the steady hands even now trying, out of pure stubborn habit, to check his own wound rather than let her fuss over it. The plain, unremarkable clothes of a man who had clearly never had much, and had never seemed to want much beyond the tools of his trade and a roof to keep the rain off his herbs. An ordinary man. A tired, decent, overlooked man who had spent 3 days treating orc wounds with no thought of reward, in a town that likely gave him little enough thanks for it even from his own kind. Because no one else was going to, she said finally, simply. And because when I looked at you in the mud, you did not look at me like I was a monster. You looked at me like I was someone worth staying for. She busied herself suddenly with unnecessary adjustments to the bandage, unwilling to let him see whatever was showing on her face. It has been a long time since anyone looked at me like that. Clayton was quiet for a moment. Then very softly he said, I will look at you like that again, as many times as you like. She did not answer. But she did not leave, either, not that night, nor the 2 that followed, sitting up in the narrow, cluttered apothecary with her axe across her knees and her eyes on the door, guarding a wounded human man against a world that had already told her, in no uncertain terms, that she had chosen wrong. The trouble, of course, was that the world was not finished telling her. News of what had happened at the ferry crossing spread through the valley faster than the Greywater's spring flood, and it did not take Ashwalker long to come looking for his niece 3 days. In fact, which Yash suspected had less to do with the distance to the warband's camp, and more to do with him working himself up to the confrontation the whole ride down. He arrived at midday on foot, alone, which told her he had come to speak rather than to drag her back by force, and for that small mercy she was grateful. She met him outside the apothecary in the dusty yard between the mill race and the road, arms crossed, chin level, refusing to give ground even as her uncle's shadow fell over her. He stood a full head taller, broad as a barn door, the gray threading his black hair the only outward sign of the years he carried. You disobeyed a direct order in the field, Rurik said without preamble. You know what that costs among our people. I know. You know the warband could vote to strip your name. Cast you out, no clan, no fire, no kin. His voice, for all its harshness, had an undercurrent in it that was not entirely anger, something closer to bewilderment, as if he genuinely could not understand what had possessed her. For a human, a stranger you had known 3 days. He was dying, uncle. Humans die. It is what they do best. Rurik's lip curled, not with cruelty exactly, but with the flat, tired contempt of a man who had buried too many kin to bloodfin spears and human border raids, both to spend much grief on the other side's losses. We were outnumbered. Another minute on that ground and you would have died beside him for nothing. Then I would have died for something, Yash said, instead of running for nothing, which is what the rest of the warband did. That struck home. She saw it land, saw the flicker of something pained cross her uncle's weathered face before the old iron settled back over it. You will not speak of the warband's discipline that way. I will speak of it exactly that way if it is the truth. She held his gaze, refusing to blink first, though her heart was hammering. I did not abandon my clan, uncle. I have bled for the Ashwalker name 100 times over, and I will bleed for it 100 times more. But I will not pretend that leaving a helpless man to die because of the shape of his ears makes me a better warrior. It only makes me a crueler one, and I did not become what I am to be cruel. For a long moment, Rurik said nothing. Behind them, the door of the apothecary creaked, and Clayton appeared in it, pale, moving slowly, one hand braced against the frame, clearly having risen from his sickbed against every instinct of good sense the moment he heard raised voices in a language he did not speak, but a tone he understood perfectly well. Rurik's eyes flicked to him, assessing, unreadable, and then back to Yash. This is the human. This is Clayton Walker, Yash said. He has treated more of our wounded in the last 3 days alone than the healers in our own camp have this whole season. Because your healers will not touch a bloodfin captive, and half our warriors would not let a human near them even to save their own lives. He does not care what blood a man bleeds. That is rare, uncle, rarer than you know. Rurik studied Clayton for a long moment, the younger man standing unsteadily in the doorway, clearly in pain, clearly frightened of the massive orc chieftain standing in the yard, and clearly not retreating an inch despite it, which seemed, in its own small way, to register with Rurik as it had registered with Yash. "He does not run," Rurik said at last, half to himself. "No," Yash agreed. "He does not." There was a silence, filled only with the creak of the mill wheel turning in the race behind them, and then Rurik exhaled a long breath through his nose, the sound of a man setting down a weight he had been carrying uphill. "The council will meet on this," he said. "Your desertion cannot simply be forgotten, Yash, whatever your reasons. There are those in the war band Threk chief among them who will use this to call your judgment into question, and mine besides, for having raised you soft. You have made my position harder, not easier. I did not do it to make anything easier for you, uncle. I did it because it was right. I know." Something almost like a smile ghosted across Rurik's mouth there and gone. "That has always been your trouble, girl. You were never built for easy." He turned to go, then paused, glancing back at Clayton once more. "Keep her alive, human. Whatever debt you think you owe her, I promise you it is smaller than the one she has just bought herself." He left without another word, and Yash watched him go with a tightness in her chest she did not examine too closely. "That did not sound like it went well," Clayton said quietly from the doorway. "It went as well as it could," Yash said, "which is not saying much." She turned to look at him, taking in properly, for the first time since the crossing, how he looked outside the haze of battle and bloodline where her own people ran broad, dark-haired, plain-featured in a way that some might call unremarkable and she found, disconcertingly, she did not want to call anything but honest. "You should be resting." "I heard shouting. I thought," he stopped, looked faintly embarrassed. "I did not want you to face him alone if it came to trouble." Something in her chest turned over, slow and warm, entirely unbidden. "You can barely stand." "I noticed that too. Seemed important to try anyway." She found herself, against every instinct of caution she had spent a lifetime building, smiling. The council meeting, when it came 4 days later, was held in the open yard before Rurik's longhouse at the Ashwalker camp, under a sky the color of hammered iron, with the whole warband gathered in a loose ring to hear the matter of Yash Ashwalker's field desertion argued out in the old way, voices raised, grievances aired, no secrets kept. Clayton was not permitted to attend. Humans did not sit in on clan council, warband custom being older and stricter than any peace treaty. He waited instead at the edge of the camp, by the horses, feeling every hostile glance the assembled orcs threw his way, understanding perhaps one word in 20 of the debate carried on the wind, and hating, with a helpless intensity that surprised him, that he could do nothing at all to help the woman who had refused to leave him bleeding in the mud. It was Threk Stonefist who spoke loudest against her, a broad, scarred warrior near Yash's own age, with a voice built for command and eyes that lingered on her a shade too long, a shade too possessively, for Clayton's liking even from a distance. He did not need the language to read the shape of that particular hunger. He wanted her, Yash told him afterward flatly, when the council had adjourned, and she came to find Clayton by the horses, her face set in the careful blankness of someone holding a great deal of anger very still. "For 2 seasons now, Threk has pressed my uncle to bind our names together, a match to strengthen the line, he calls it, though everyone in the camp knows it is his own ambitions he means to strengthen. He argued in council that my defiance of the retreat order proves I am unfit to lead war parties of my own, that I have grown soft on human sympathies, and that the clan's safety would be better served if my voice in council were diminished." Her jaw tightened. "In favor of his. And the council, split. My uncle held the center. I am not stripped of name or fire, not yet, but I am to answer for it before the full clan gathering at the turning of the season, and until then my voice carries less weight in matters of war. It could have been worse." She let out a breath. "It could have been considerably worse, and Threk knows it, and he will not let the matter rest merely because the council did not rule outright in his favor today. Clayton was quiet a moment, watching her, the tension in her shoulders, the anger banked but not extinguished in her eyes, and something in him, some old habit of tending to hurts other people tried to hide, made him reach out, hesitant, and rest a hand against her forearm. "I am sorry," he said. "This is my fault." "If I had not, do not," Yash said, sharply enough that he flinched, though her hand came up to cover his before he could withdraw it, an unexpected gentleness undercutting the sharpness of her tone. "Do not you dare apologize for being worth saving, Clayton Walker. I chose. I would choose it again." She looked down at where his hand lay beneath hers, at the strange, deliberate warmth of the contact, and her voice dropped rougher. "I am only sorry that choosing it costs more than I thought it would." It was Rurik himself, 3 days later, who came to the apothecary with the proposal that would tangle their fates together far more deeply than either of them yet understood. He came at dusk, alone again, and sat heavily on the bench outside the shop, while Yash brought him a cup of the bitter Milltown ale Clayton kept for trade, and he laid the matter out with the bluntness of a man who had turned it over in his mind many times before speaking it aloud. "The Bloodfin ambush at the crossing was no accident of timing," Rurik said. "I have had scouts asking quiet questions this past week. The raiders knew exactly when the mill barge would be loaded, exactly when our patrol strength at the crossing would be thinnest. Someone told them." His eyes flicked toward Yash. "And I do not think it was chance that the attack came precisely when a warband vote on Threk's standing was already brewing. An attack that would either kill you outright, girl, or drive you to exactly the kind of reckless defiance that would hand him the argument he wanted on a platter." Yash went very still. "You think Threk arranged the ambush himself?" "I think Threk has been trading words with Bloodfin riders for longer than is healthy for a warrior of this clan, and I cannot yet prove it, and until I can, accusing him outright would tear this warband apart from the inside at the very moment the Bloodfin are testing our borders hardest." Rurik rubbed a hand over his face, weary in a way Clayton had not seen from him before. "What I need in the meantime is time, and I need this valley to believe the Ashwalker line and Millbrook Ford stand together, strong enough that neither Threk nor the Bloodfin dare move openly against us." "What are you asking?" Yash said slowly. "The town council here has grown nervous," Rurik said. "An orc warband has just fought a battle within sight of their mills, and half the valley is asking whether Millbrook Ford stands with the Ashwalker clan or merely tolerates us at their crossing while it is convenient. If it were known, publicly, plainly, in a way no one could mistake, that an Ashwalker warrior and a respected man of this town were bound together, courting with honest intent, it would answer that question loudly enough to buy us both room to breathe. It would show the Bloodfin, a Ashwalker-human alliance too strong to test. It would show Threk that his talk of my niece's disloyalty to her own kind is nothing but poison, since the whole valley would see her honored, not shamed, for the bond." He looked between them. "A pledge of courtship. Not the true binding, not yet, perhaps not ever, that would be for the two of you to decide in time, but a declared intent, formal enough to be believed, public enough to matter." The silence that followed was long enough that Clayton could hear the mill wheel turning outside, the evening birds settling in the eaves. "You want us to pretend," he said finally. "I want you to buy time," Rurik said. "Whether it is pretending is a question I leave to the two of you. I have watched my niece defy a warband's retreat call to keep a hand pressed against your wound, human. I have watched her sit vigil outside your door for 3 nights running with her axe across her knees. I am an old warrior, not a blind one." He rose, draining the last of the ale. "Think on it, but think quickly. Threk will not wait for us to be ready." He left them there in the fading light, the question hanging between them like smoke that would not clear. "We do not have to," Clayton said, after a while, quietly. "If it makes you uncomfortable, if it puts you in a harder position with your own people than you are already in." "Would it put you in a harder position?" Yash asked. "With yours?" Clayton considered that honestly, the way he considered most things. The town already whispers about the apothecary who treats orc wounds without payment and sits up nights with an orc woman guarding his door. I do not think their opinion of me has much further to fall. A faint, wry smile. Might as well give them something worth whispering about. Yash studied him a long moment, something unreadable moving behind her dark eyes. You do not seem frightened of what people will say. I have spent my whole life being the man nobody quite looked at twice, Clayton said simply. Overlooked is not the same as untroubled by loneliness, Yash. If pretending to be chosen by you means the whole valley finally looks, I find I do not much mind the pretending. He paused, and something more honest slipped through before he could stop it. Though I confess, some part of it does not feel entirely like pretending, even now. Yash's throat worked. No, she said low. It does not, does it? They did not touch that night. Not more than the brush of her hand against his when she took the empty ale cup from him. Not more than the long look that passed between them before she withdrew to her post outside his door. But something had shifted all the same. Some threshold crossed that neither of them named aloud. The pretending, once it began, proved a strange and treacherous thing. It began simply enough, Yash walking beside Clayton through Millbrook Ford's narrow Market Street on the first bright morning after Rurick's proposal, her hand resting, deliberately, in the crook of his arm, both of them holding themselves with the careful, performed ease of two people wanting very badly to be seen together. The town noticed, of course. Conversation died in little pockets as they passed, stalls of turnips and river fish falling silent, children tugging at their mothers' skirts to point. An orc woman, walking arm in arm with the town's own apothecary, in broad daylight, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. It was at the third stall, the miller's, where sacks of ground flour stood piled beside baskets of new bread, that the pretending nearly became something else entirely. The miller's wife, a broad, red-faced woman named Prudence Hale, planted herself in their path with her arms crossed and her chin jutted forward. You, she said to Clayton, ignoring Yash entirely, as if the orc woman on his arm were a shadow she could simply refuse to see. You have taken leave of your senses, Clayton Walker. Bringing that thing into decent company. After what happened at the crossing, my Tam nearly lost his barge to the fire those savages brought down on us. The Bloodfin brought that fire, Prudence, Clayton said, evenly, though Yash felt his arm tense beneath her hand. Yash's own warband fought and bled to defend this crossing. She fought and bled to save my life on that ground, in case the memory of it has slipped past you already. She is still one of them. She is Yash Ashwalker, Clayton said, and something in his voice, quiet as it was, carried enough steel that Prudence actually stepped back half a pace. And she is the woman I am courting, and if that troubles you, you are welcome to take your custom to the apothecary in Fells crossing 3 days upriver, though I hear his tinctures are watered and his stitches leave scars. A ripple of low laughter ran through the small crowd that had gathered, and Prudence's face went a deeper shade of red, torn between outrage and the plain fact that half the town owed Clayton their lives or their children's lives at one time or another, and could not quite bring themselves to side against him in the open street. It was then that Prudence's grown nephew, a broad young man named Garrick who worked the mill loading dock, stepped forward with a hay fork still in his hand from whatever chore he'd abandoned to see the commotion, jabbing it not quite at Yash, but close enough that the threat was unmistakable. Maybe the beast needs reminding what happens to her kind that wander too far into a decent town, Garrick said, with the particular bravado of a young man performing courage for an audience. Clayton moved before he had quite decided to. He stepped between Yash and the leveled fork, close enough that the tines nearly grazed his chest, one hand raised not in a fighter's stance. He had never been a fighting man, but steady, deliberate, immovable. "Put it down, Garrick," he said. "You are not going to put a hay fork through the woman who fought off a Bloodfin war party to keep this town's mill from burning to the water line, and you are certainly not going to do it while I am standing in front of her. Move, Walker. No." The word hung in the market square, absolute, unshaking, and Clayton ordinary, unremarkable, overlooked Clayton Walker, who had never in his life raised a fist against another man, did not move so much as an inch, his whole body a wall between the leveled fork and the woman behind him. Behind him, Yash's breath caught. No one, in all her years of war and rivalry and the long, wearying business of being feared before she was ever known, had ever put themselves bodily between her and a threat. She had done that for others 100 times. She had never once had it done for her. Garrick's nerve broke before Clayton's did. He lowered the fork, muttering something about not wanting trouble, and slunk back into the crowd, and the tension in the square broke like a fever, conversation resuming in scattered, uneasy pockets. Yash caught Clayton's arm and turned him to face her, right there in the open street, her expression fierce and strange and unguarded in a way she had not let it be since the mud at the crossing. "That was a foolish thing to do," she said. "He could have driven that fork straight through you." "Probably," Clayton agreed. "You are not a warrior, Clayton Walker. You are a man who mends bones and boils herbs. You do not step between an orc and a hay fork." "I did not think about it," he admitted. "I only knew I was not going to stand behind you and watch." Something in her face cracked open, just slightly, the careful blankness she had worn through the whole performance of the morning giving way to something rawer, something that looked almost like wonder. Then, without any warning at all, she caught the front of his shirt in one fist and kissed him. It was not gentle. It was not the careful, tentative thing either of them might have expected from a pretend courtship still finding its feet. It was fierce and hungry and a little desperate, the kiss of a woman who had spent her whole life being feared or fought and had just, for the first time, been chosen, protected by someone with nothing to gain from it but the simple fact of caring. Clayton made a startled sound against her mouth and then, recovering, kissed her back with an intensity that surprised them both, his hand coming up to cradle the side of her jaw, careful of the tusk, reverent in a way that made her chest ache. They broke apart to a market square gone entirely silent, every eye upon them, Prudence Hale's mouth hanging open in scandalized shock, and Clayton, flushed and breathless, managed a slightly unsteady, "Well, I believe that answers whether the town believes us." "That," Yash said, still holding fistfuls of his shirt, her voice rough, "was not for the town." They walked the rest of the market in a charged, electric silence, no longer performing anything at all. The pretending, from that day forward, was a lie in name only. Word of the kiss in the market square traveled up the valley faster than the Bloodfin ambush had, and it reached Threck's Stonefist within the week, delivered no doubt with considerable relish by whichever Ashwalker warrior had first heard it from a trading post gossip. He came to Millbrook Ford himself to see it confirmed, arriving at the ferry crossing on a gray evening with 3 of his own followers at his back, and found Yash and Clayton at the water's edge, where the ferryman, an old, weathered riverman named Bostic, who had grown fond of the strange couple over the preceding weeks, was securing his flat-bottomed craft for the night. "So it is true," Threck said, dismounting, his eyes moving over Clayton with open contempt before settling on Yash with something colder, more possessive, that made Clayton's jaw tighten instinctively. "The great Yash Ashwalker, finest blade in her uncle's warband, has taken to warming a human healer's bed." "Mind your tongue, Threck," Yash said low. "I mind it fine. I only speak what the whole clan already whispers." He circled a step closer, and Clayton, without quite meaning to, shifted his weight to put himself half a pace ahead of Yash, a gesture that earned him a short, ugly laugh from Threck. "Careful, little healer. I have killed men twice your size for standing where you are standing now." "He is under my protection," Yash said, stepping forward herself, refusing to be shielded, her hand dropping to the axe at her belt. "As is anyone I choose to protect, Threck, a fact you would do well to remember before you bring your followers onto ground I have already bled to hold. Protection." Threck's lip curled. "Is that what they are calling it now? I offered you a binding that would have made you first among the warband's women, Yash, strength paired with strength, and you spit on that to warm yourself against a man who could not lift my axe with both arms." "I did not spit on anything," Yash said. "I simply never wanted what you offered. There is a difference, Threk, between strength and cruelty, and you have never once managed to tell them apart. Threk's eyes flicked once more to Clayton, a long, assessing, ugly look, and then back to Yash, and something calculating settled into his expression that made the hair on the back of Clayton's neck rise. "The clan gathering comes at the turning of the season," Threk said. "Your uncle's grace will not shield you forever, Yash. When the full council sits in judgment of your desertion at the crossing, I will be there to remind them exactly what your human sympathies have cost this clan, and I promise you, this pretty little arrangement with your healer will not save you." He remounted, his followers falling in behind him. "Enjoy your borrowed time." They rode off into the dusk, and Yash stood watching them go with her jaw tight and her hand still resting on her axe. "He frightens you," Clayton observed quietly, once they were alone again with only Bostic the ferryman pretending very hard to be absorbed in his mooring ropes. "He does not frighten me," Yash said. "He worries me. There is a difference." She exhaled slowly. "Threk has always wanted power more than he has wanted honor, and men like that do not simply give up when a council vote goes against them. He will look for another way to move against my standing before the season turns, and I do not yet know what shape that will take." It was Clayton, 3 weeks later, who found the shape of it, quite by accident, in the way that so many important things are found. A bloodfin raider had been brought in half-dead from a border skirmish, captured rather than killed, and delivered to Clayton's apothecary under Rurik's orders for questioning once he was fit to speak. A decision that had caused no small amount of grumbling among the warband, who saw little reason to spend good bandages on an enemy's life, but which Clayton undertook without complaint, as he undertook every wound that came through his door. It was while cleaning the man's injuries that Clayton noticed the arrowhead lodged shallow in the raider's shoulder, a distinctive make, the fletching bound with a particular twist of red-dyed sinew that he recognized instantly, because he had removed one exactly like it from his own side, weeks before, at the ferry crossing. "This is not bloodfin work," he said slowly, turning the extracted arrowhead over in his fingers, frowning. "I removed one of these from my own wound after the ambush. I assumed it was simply a bloodfin arrow that had struck me in the crossfire. But if this man is bloodfin himself, and he has taken a wound from the very same fletching—" Yash, who had been standing watch by the door as she so often did now, crossed the room in 3 quick strides and took the arrowhead from his hand, turning it in the lamplight, her expression going very still. "This is Ashwalker fletching," she said. "This binding twist, only one warrior in our warband ties his arrows this way. I have seen him do it 100 times by the fire." She looked up and her eyes had gone hard and cold. "Threk. You are saying Threk shot his own warband's ally at the crossing ambush?" "I am saying," Yash said slowly, the pieces falling into place with the terrible clarity of a puzzle long resisted finally yielding, "that Threk was there, at the crossing. Not with the bloodfin raiders, but shooting alongside them in the confusion, where no one would think to look twice at one more arrow among 100. He shot you, Clayton, or meant to shoot near enough to force exactly the choice I made, because he knew, somehow, that I would not leave a dying man on that ground, and he needed me to defy the retreat order publicly, in front of the whole warband, so that his case against my judgment would have teeth." Her hands had curled into fists. "He turned my own compassion into a weapon against me, and he did it by nearly killing you to accomplish it." The bloodfin raider on the cot, drifting in and out of feverish awareness, chose that moment to speak, his voice a thin rasp. "The Ashwalker traitor," he mumbled, in the trade tongue common enough along the border for both of them to understand. "He came to our chief before the crossing raid, promised us an easy strike if we timed it to his signal, said it would break his rival's standing for good. A weak, humorless laugh. Did not care how many of his own bled, so long as the woman bled worst of all her pride, if not her body." Yash stood very still for a long moment, the arrowhead clenched in her fist tight enough to draw a bead of dark blood, and Clayton watched something in her grief, fury, betrayal all knotted together, settle finally into a cold, unshakable resolve. He will answer for this, she said, before the whole clan gathering, not quietly, not in some private reckoning he can twist afterward into another lie against me. In the open, where every warrior of the Ashwalker line can see exactly what he is. How? Clayton asked. A wounded Bloodfin raider's fevered mumbling will not be enough to convict a warrior of Threk standing before a full council, not against his denials. No, Yash agreed. It will not. She looked down at the arrowhead in her palm, but a trial by combat will. The clan gathering, when the season turned, drew every soul in the river valley who had a stake in its outcome. Ashwalker warriors down from the high camps in their war leathers, Bloodfin scouts watching from a careful, treaty-bound distance along the ridge, and half of Millbrook Ford besides, drawn by rumor and unable to resist the spectacle of an orc trial held, for the first time in living memory, within sight of the ferry crossing itself. On the wide flat meadow above the mill race, where both peoples could gather without either feeling they trespassed on the other's ground. Rurik presided from a raised stone at the meadow's edge, the clan elders arrayed beside him, and Threk Stonefist stood at the center of the gathering with his arms crossed and his expression carved from confidence, clearly having judged correctly that a Bloodfin captive's fevered word alone would never be enough to condemn him. "You accuse me of treachery," Threk said, when Rurik had laid the charge before the assembly, his voice pitched to carry, performing outrage for the watching crowd. "On the word of an enemy raider and the testimony of a woman who has already been judged unfit in her own conduct. This is desperation, not justice. Yash Ashwalker seeks to save her own standing by dragging mine down beside her. I have more than a raider's word," Yash said, stepping forward into the center of the gathering, and the crowd's murmur died as she raised the arrowhead high enough for every eye to see. "This binding twist is yours, Threk. I have watched you tie 100 arrows this way since we were children together at the same fire." It was pulled from Clayton Walker's side at the ferry crossing ambush. The same ambush where a captured Bloodfin scout confirms an Ashwalker traitor arranged the timing of the attack to force my hand and break my standing before this very council. "Fletching proves nothing," Threk said, though something had tightened at the corner of his jaw. "Any warrior might copy another's binding." "Then prove your innocence the old way," Yash said, and her voice rang out over the meadow, absolute and unflinching. "I challenge you, Threk Stonefist, before this whole gathering to trial by combat, first blood or yield, as our law allows, and let the spirits of our ancestors judge between a traitor's tongue and a warrior's blade." A ripple of astonished murmurs swept through the assembled clan. Trial by combat was old law, rarely invoked, but absolute in its authority once accepted. No council could overturn its verdict. No politics could argue with its result. Threk's eyes flicked, just once, toward the crowd, gauging whether refusal would cost him more than acceptance, and Clayton, watching from the edge of the gathering where the human onlookers stood, felt his stomach drop at the calculation he saw cross the other man's face. "Very well," Threk said finally, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across his scarred features. "I accept your challenge, Yash Ashwalker. And when I have beaten the treachery charge from your mouth with my own axe, this council will remember exactly whose judgment was unfit." Clayton pushed forward through the crowd before he could stop himself, catching Yash's arm as she turned to prepare. "You do not have to do this. There has to be another way to prove it, the raider's testimony, the arrowhead, surely enough combined, not enough to strip a warrior of Threk standing outright, not in the eyes of half this gathering, who still believe I acted from human sympathy rather than honor." Yash cupped his face in one broad hand, her thumb tracing the line of his jaw with a gentleness that contrasted sharply with the grim set of her expression. "This is the only judgment the whole clan will accept without question, Clayton. I have trained with axe and blade since I could walk. Let me do this. He is bigger than you. Threk is stronger," Yash agreed. "But I have always been faster, and I have spent my whole life fighting men who underestimated exactly how much that matters." She pressed her forehead briefly against his, a gesture of startling tenderness in the middle of the gathering meadow, heedless of who watched. "Trust me." "I do," Clayton said, and meant it with his whole aching heart. "I trust you more than I have trusted anything in my life. I am only afraid of losing you to prove it." "You will not lose me," Yash said, low, fierce, absolute. "I did not stay on that ground at the crossing to die for you, Clayton Walker. I stayed to live for you. I intend to keep doing exactly that." She kissed him once, quick and hard, in front of the whole watching gathering, and then she turned and walked to the center of the meadow to face Threck Stonefist beneath the wide gray sky, and the entire valley held its breath. They circled each other first, axe and blade catching the pale afternoon light, the crowd forming a dense, silent ring around the meadow, Ashwalker warriors on one side, Millbrook Ford townsfolk pressed close on the other, and along the distant ridge, even a scattering of Bloodfin scouts who had ridden down under truce banner to witness the outcome of a matter that touched their own clan schemes as well. Rurik stood at the meadow's edge with his hand resting on the hilt of his own weapon, jaw locked tight, and Clayton stood as close to the front of the human crowd as anyone would allow him, his whole body strung tight with a fear he had never felt so purely in his life. Not even bleeding out in the mud at the crossing had frightened him the way watching Yash step into that circle did. Threck struck first, a heavy, sweeping blow meant to test her guard, and Yash rolled beneath it with a speed that drew a gasp from the crowd, coming up inside his reach to drive the flat of her axe hard into his ribs. He staggered, recovered, swung again, faster this time, angrier, the confident showmanship of the opening exchange giving way to real fury as he realized the fight would not be the easy demonstration he had planned. Steel rang against steel. Yash ducked, weaved, took a glancing cut along her upper arm that drew blood and a collective wince from the watching crowd, and answered it with a strike of her own that opened a shallow line across Threck's forearm. "First blood is drawn," someone in the crowd called, but neither combatant yielded. The old law allowed either fighter to press on past first blood if the matter at stake demanded full resolution, and both Yash and Threck clearly understood that nothing less than total, unambiguous victory would settle what stood between them. Threck pressed his size advantage, driving her back with a series of heavy blows that forced her to give ground, and for one terrible moment Clayton thought he saw her stumble, saw Threck's axe rise for what could have been a killing stroke, and every healer's instinct in his body screamed at him to move, to do something, though there was nothing at all he could do from outside that circle but watch. But the stumble had been a feint. Yash dropped low as Threck's axe swept through the space where she had been, planted her weight, and drove upward with the full strength of her legs and back combined, her axe haft catching Threck under the chin hard enough to snap his head back and send him sprawling into the meadow grass, his own weapon flying from his grip to land yards away. The meadow fell utterly silent. Yash stood over him, chest heaving, blood running freely down her arm, her axe raised and steady, and for a long, taut moment it seemed the whole valley waited to see whether she would deliver the killing stroke the old law would have permitted her. "Yield," she said instead, voice carrying flat and clear across the meadow. "Yield and confess before this whole gathering what you arranged with the Bloodfin chieftain at the ferry crossing, or do not yield, and let this council watch me finish what your treachery started." Threck lay in the grass, blood trickling from his split lip, staring up at her with an expression that cycled rapidly through fury, calculation, and finally, as he took in the unbroken ring of witnesses, the immovable set of her stance, the plain fact that no rescue was coming, something that looked very much like defeat. "I yield," he spat, the words tearing out of him like they cost him blood of their own. "I arranged the timing with Goreth Bloodfin. I wanted her broken before the council, wanted the warband to see her weakness so my own claim to lead would go unchallenged. I did not care how many bled at that crossing so long as she bled worst in the eyes of the clan." A furious murmur swept through the gathered Ashwalker warriors, and Rurik descended from his stone with his face like a thundercloud. But it was Yash who spoke next, lowering her axe at last, her voice gone quiet with something that was not quite triumph, something closer to grief for a warrior she had once, perhaps, respected before ambition had rotted him through. "You could have simply asked the council to judge my conduct honestly," she said. "You did not need to nearly kill an innocent man to do it." "Innocent men do not matter to warriors who mean to lead," Threk said bitterly from the grass. "Then you were never fit to lead," Yash said, "and this council will remember that long after your name is stripped from the fire." They stripped him that same afternoon, exile from the Ashwalker clan, name struck from the warband rolls, sent from the meadow on foot with nothing but the clothes on his back, forbidden the fires and the hunting grounds and the kinship of the people he had betrayed. Clayton watched him go with a complicated tangle of feelings he did not try too hard to untangle, and then he was moving, pushing through the dispersing crowd, and Yash was there, blood-streaked and exhausted and more beautiful to him in that moment than he had words to say, and he caught her up in his arms without a single thought for who might be watching. "You are hurt," he said, already reaching for the cut along her arm with a healer's automatic urgency. "It is shallow. You would know, you have stitched worse on lesser men." But she let him fuss over it anyway, standing still in the meadow while he tore a strip of clean linen from his own shirt sleeve and bound the wound with careful, familiar hands, and when he was done, she caught his chin in her fingers and tilted his face up to hers. "You were afraid," she said. "I saw it from the circle. You looked like you meant to climb over every warrior in that crowd to reach me." "I would have," Clayton admitted, "if you had needed me to. Though I suspect I would have made a very poor showing of it." "You would have tried anyway," Yash said, something soft and wondering in her voice. "That is the whole of it, is it not? You would try, even knowing you would fail, simply because you could not bear to stand still and watch." "I have stood still and watched too many people I could not save," Clayton said quietly. "I do not think I have it in me to do that again. Not for you." Yash was silent a moment, studying him with an intensity that made his breath catch, and then she said, low and rough, "Rurik offered us a pretense months ago, a courtship declared for the sake of politics to buy us time and protection." "I remember. I do not want the pretense anymore, Clayton." Her hand found his, calloused fingers threading through his own with a gentleness that undid him entirely. "I do not want a declared intent that serves the clan's convenience. I want the true thing. I have wanted it, I think, since the moment you looked up at me from the mud and did not flinch." She drew a breath, and for the first time since he had known her, Yash Ashwalker, fearless in battle, unbroken before councils, unbending before a warband's judgment, looked something close to nervous. "I am asking you properly now, not for the valley's sake or the clan's or the town's, for mine. Will you bind your name to mine, Clayton Walker, in the old way, before witnesses who matter to us both?" Clayton felt something crack open in his chest, warm and overwhelming. 3 months of careful pretending and unspoken longing finally given permission to become exactly what it had always secretly been. "Yes," he said, and then, because one word did not seem enough to hold what he felt, "Yash, I have spent my whole life mending other people's wounds and going home alone to an empty room above an apothecary's shelf. I did not know, until you refused to leave me bleeding at that crossing, how much I had simply resigned myself to being overlooked. You did not overlook me. You chose me against your own warband's orders, against your own clan's judgment, against every reason caution might have given you to walk away. I do not have anything grand to offer you in return, only that I will choose you back every single day for as long as you will have me. That," Yash said, her voice thick, "is grander than you know." The binding was held 3 weeks later, on a clear autumn evening, at the threshold of Clayton's own apothecary. A choice Yash had insisted upon, over the traditional campfire setting of Ashwalker custom, because it was there, she said, at that very door, that she had first understood what it meant to fight for something worth keeping rather than merely surviving another season's war. The whole valley came. Rurik stood as witness on the clan's behalf, his weathered face uncharacteristically soft with pride as he watched his niece stand in the doorway of a human shop in her finest war leathers, freshly oiled, the bronze studs of her bodice catching the last of the evening light. Bostic the ferryman stood near the front of the human gathering, grinning around a pipe stem. Even Prudence Hale had come, arms still crossed, expression still faintly disapproving, but present all the same present, Clayton suspected, because half the valley had come to understand, over the preceding months, that there was no arguing with what stood so plainly and unshakably true between the town's apothecary and the Ashwalker warrior who had refused to leave his side. They exchanged the old vows at the threshold, 1 foot each still on the worn wooden step, 1 foot each crossing over into the little shop that would from that night be both their homes. A custom, Rurik explained to the gathered humans who did not know it, meant to symbolize 2 lives choosing to cross fully into each other's keeping, neither one left standing alone on the outside. "I choose this ground," Yash said, her voice steady and clear over the hushed meadow of onlookers, "and I choose the man who stands on it. I did not leave him when my own warband called retreat, and I will not leave him now, nor at any crossing yet to come. Whatever ground you stand, Clayton Walker, I will stand it with you." "I choose this ground," Clayton echoed, his voice rough with feeling, "and I choose the woman who fought to hold it for me when I could not hold it myself. I have spent my life patching the wounds of men who walked away from me the moment they were healed. You never once walked away. I do not intend to either." They crossed the threshold together, hand in hand, and Yash Ashwalker, fiercest blade in her uncle's warband, feared across 2 clans, chosen by no one until she chose for herself, pulled Clayton Walker into a kiss before the whole gathered valley, deep and certain and utterly unhurried, sealing a vow that no council, no rival, and no warband's retreat horn would ever again have the power to break. The cheer that went up from the assembled crowd, Ashwalker warriors and Millbrook Ford townsfolk alike, voices mingling for perhaps the first time in the valley's long, hard history into something like a single sound of celebration, rolled out across the river and the mills and the ferry crossing where it had all begun. And Clayton, laughing against Yash's mouth, thought he had never in his life felt less alone. They stood together in the doorway a long moment after the kiss ended, foreheads pressed close, her hand still tangled in the front of his shirt exactly as it had been that first day in the market square, and Yash murmured, low enough that only he could hear it beneath the noise of the celebrating crowd, "No more retreats, Clayton Walker." "No more retreats," he agreed. "Only ground worth holding, and you holding it with me." And in the river valley of mills and farms, where the ferry still carried grain and gossip alike across the Greywater's current, and where an apothecary's lintel now bore, carved deep and lasting beside the dried herbs, the twined mark of an Ashwalker binding, that was exactly what they did season after season, crossing after crossing, choosing each other without fail every single time.